Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the editors of Strategy Page discuss current events with a splash of history. I'm Dan Masterson, host of Strategy Talk. With me today is the editor of Strategy Page, well-known military author and game designer Jim Dunnigan. Also joining us is the associate editor of Strategy Page, columnist and author Austin Bay.
Jim and Austin, is missile defense a reality or is it a pipe dream, Jim?
It's a reality, but it's not 100%. It depends on what's being fired at you and what you're using to defend with. For example, Iran has found one solution for ballistic missile defense, which could be crippling for Iran because they don't have that many missiles. They don't get too many chances, and Israel, their most likely opponent, has excellent, ballistic missile defense, but it's expensive. That's the Arrow system. So they've basically capitalized on their low-flying, long-distance, cruise missile UAVs, and they developed a whole bunch of them from the RQ-170, American RQ-170, that's jet-powered, delta-shaped, reconnaissance UAV that crashed in eastern Afghanistan in 2011. Now is intact enough where they could basically copy a lot of the engineering secrets in it. And I don't think they've done it's a jet-powered one yet, but they've done a whole bunch of propeller-driven ones. For example, the Shahed 136. That's the ones the Russians bought, and that's not invincible, but it's getting through. I think they fired 5 of them, or they launched 5 of them at Odessa and another city, a Ukrainian city in the south. And the Ukrainians managed to shoot 3 of them down with conventional air defenses. But the problem with the Ukrainian, the Iranian drones is that they are difficult to detect by radar. Now, again, the Israelis developed counters to that because they're usually the target for that sort of thing. But it requires a special optical and radar detection system, and then, of course, systems to knock it down. The Israelis are very good at that, but Ukraine, has to improvise. They're getting a lot of conventional air defense systems which work, and they've got cannon in aircraft artillery, small millimeter, which seems to work. But they still have a problem detecting them. Now, against the ballistic missiles, they've knocked some down. The only thing they have going for them there is the Russians are literally running out of those missiles. Because they can't get the Western components they need to make the guidance system work. So they're firing a lot of unguided missiles. They have a lot of them. They have a range of like up to 300 kilometers, but they're only good if they're aimed at area targets, and that's what Ukraine is complaining about. The Russians are firing at cities, in populated areas, urban areas. Where they'll do some damage, but they can't, hit a single target like the Ukrainians can do with their missiles, because they have air. How should I put it? Air superiority, or the Russians don't have air superiority, and the Ukrainians have access to the Starlink system. They use that for navigation. And they can basically find and hit a target before Russia, can intervene with anything. So it's a matter of what technology you have, what technology you need, and how quickly you can adapt. With that in mind, you can basically protect against something is coming. But there are so many things that the enemy can throw at you that it's difficult to have everything in place to deal with everything they're going to, shoot your way. Ukraine has done that, but they've had several months to protect against it. For example, the latest thing the Russians are been using, they've used several hundred S-300 anti-aircraft missiles, which are obsolete. They basically cleaned out. They've been cleaning out whole entire batteries and shipping the missiles and the launchers to the Ukrainian border, and in some cases, I think they have them in Crimea as well. And these can basically be used as surface-to-surface missiles. They're not that accurate. They have a small warhead, but it's all they got. I mean, they're difficult to defend against, coming in because they come in pretty fast. But, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. So the Ukrainians don't have to worry that much about it. Israel, they're probably the best prepared in the world, and everybody else is, somewhere in between. For example, Japan decided they couldn't put their Aegis ashore. That's this one system that's probably the best in the world that's fitted on American and many I think there's 100 ships now that have Aegis, air defense systems with the SM-6 missile. But they tried to put it in 2 military bases, but then the civilians found out that when it launches, it basically discards some components which could conceivably fall on civilians. So they're now making these 20,000 ton twin hull Aegis at sea ships, and these will be ready in a year or two. I mean, they're easy to build, and Japan still has a huge shipbuilding industry, so they can turn them out pretty quick. But they're square, more than long, as it were, and they just go out there and they got a crew of about 100, and they just circle around. Two Aegis systems can protect all of Japan pretty effectively because, like I say, that SM-6 missile has probably the most effective general purpose, air defense missile in the world. So that's their solutions to that, and they have about a dozen or more Aegis-equipped destroyers and frigates, and they will basically have them standing by to fill in when the Aegis at sea, as it were, has to come into port for crew changes, maintenance, what have you. So, it's really a toss-up. Nobody has 100% protection against ballistic missiles, or, for that matter, all manner of UAVs that are basically, set for attacking a single target, using the GPS navigation, and are carrying, maybe 80, 100, 150 kilograms, 300, 400 pounds of explosives. That can be a pretty potent weapon. And that's the one the Iranians are specializing in right now because, they're working on a small budget.
Austin, how do you see the missile defense system?
Okay. First of all, when it's major powers, Russia, China, the United States, and in the nuclear weapons business, you're going to have to include France and Great Britain and possibly North Korea and Iran. Well, I should say Israel as well, but among the greater powers, what is the defense remains balance of terror. That there'll be a nuclear counterstrike that will be devastating, as devastating to you as the attack you launched on Russia shooting a target in NATO or at the United States. It's going to be erased in a nuclear bombardment. The idea behind missile defense clearly is that we'll try to rebalance and protect using anti-missile missiles to take out an enemy incoming enemy strike, and it's not possible now, and hasn't been possible. It was original idea as portrayed by Strategic Defense Initiative in the Reagan administration, and that was exaggeration, American propaganda that we were going to build a nuclear Astrodome. And the Russians believed we could do it, so that it had some efficacy into the end of the Cold War, because they were afraid that the United States would build it complete with beam weapons, lasers and perhaps other type proton beam weapons and the like. Now, quick sidebar here: the Israelis have a system called Iron Dome, which they use. They can shoot down. It's tactical right now. They can shoot down artillery rounds as well as incoming rockets and missiles. And also, U.S. and Israel are testing, and we've made great advances in using beam weapons, lasers. We've had test lasers on Navy ships, and I believe Jim can correct me if I'm wrong. Early next year, we're actually going to have an operational laser on one of our guided missile destroyers. And that laser is, as I understand it, is primarily used to stop, knock down anti-ship missiles threatening the surface ship. But with the kind of generate on some of these larger naval vessels, we're reaching a point where you might be able to knock down larger cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and even the anti-carrier ballistic missiles the Chinese are fielding. That's one of the driving factors behind a naval laser. So what did the United States go and do? We built a limited or thin shield. The first Bush administration, I believe, is the one that came up with the name GPALS, Global Protection Against Limited Strikes, I think is what the acronym stands for. It's close to it. But the thin shield would have closer to the target. If it sounds like it was set up to deal with North Korea, you're right. Potentially Iran. You've got theater type anti-missile missiles, and that's where THAAD comes in. Now it means terminal high altitude area defense. It used to be theater high altitude area defense. That's when it was originally built by Army Missile Command, and those are mobile. We've got a battery on Guam and a battery South Korea of THAADs now. They're a good missile. They've got a lot longer range than the Patriot PAC-3, which true missile itself, but it's only got a limited interception range. Usually you'll see 25 to 30 kilometers. It's a little longer than that, but it's you can see if you've got the PAC-3 and THAAD to try to take down a intermediate range or short range ballistic missile, but perhaps with luck a enemy longer range in the ascent phase. And then behind that, you come in, and Jim was talking about Aegis. And I think what the Japanese have come up with, since they couldn't actually put them ashore, essentially what they look like to me are arsenal barges. But they're going to put the Aegis on there. It's not just the SM-6, Standard Missile 6, which is really a super missile that you can use for almost anything. They've got the SM-3, which is exo-atmospheric. Longer range, it can hit something in outer space. And I believe right now all or almost all of the 60-odd BMD's ballistic missile defense vessels, most of them are destroyers, carry the SM-3, which is a big missile, but it's part of that Aegis pack. And it can take down a IRBM and even as fast as they're going, a chance at an ICBM. And then behind that, the problem with what's behind it is there aren't very many of them, but they're the long lance. They used to be called GBI, ground-based interceptor. Then they changed the name, mid-course interception. But they're essentially an ICBM, an American ICBM, with a interceptor anti-missile warhead. That's also retargetable now. That's something that has been brought in really within the last. Unfortunately, I think the last figure I saw, there were 44 of them, and for some reason 41 were considered to be operational. But damn, that figure's 3 years old. Why so few? Well, it may, to refresh people's memory, there were still American politicians who were against a more robust anti-missile defense as late as 2003. And the person I'll just pick on right now is Nancy Pelosi. I ended up writing a column about her comments in 2003. She was still playing the game that Reagan was going to start. No, he wasn't president, but Reagan was going to start a nuclear war because he had initiated a strategic defense initiative. It was a truly divisive political issue in the United States as late as I say 2003. But the long range ones were set up. We've got a big missile field in Alaska and one at Vandenberg Air Force Base. There was a move during the late part of the George W. Bush administration to put in a few of the long range anti-missile missiles. And I believe it was going to go into Maine. There was also an initiative to put 10 of them, just 10, in Poland. And Poland had signed off on this, had gone all through NATO. And in, I think it was September 2009, the Obama administration nixed it outright. That was part of the Obama administration's so-called reset of relations with Russia. Because Putin, however, I can guarantee you, the Russians are probably the world's greatest mathematicians. You could sit there and figure it out. Those missiles weren't going to shoot down Russian ICBMs. They were to stop a shot from Iran against Europe. But anyway, to get back into there are fewer than 50 of these long-range anti-missile missiles. And since you can see they're weighted towards the Pacific, it's to stop a North Korean attack. It couldn't stop one from China, certainly not one from Russia. And so if they were anything, the claim was that the missiles are destabilizing. No, they're quite stabilizing because it gives the Kim junta another reason to pause and not even shoot at South Korea, but much less think that they could put a nuke on Los Angeles or even Washington. One other thing I'd add too is I don't know what the status of this is now, but the U.S. Navy has a quote unquote experimental Aegis ashore in the Hawaiian Islands too. As Jim had pointed out too, a couple of these Aegis ashore bases are in Eastern Europe. Romania has one, isn't that right, Jim?
Yeah,
I think that's right. They've got one, and they're really good systems. But what we've got right now, Dan, and I've described it, all the little it's a layered defense, and it's a thin missile defense, but it provides deterrence. It certainly can handle an accidental launch. I say that with, it's not absolute certainty, but you've got something if there's an accidental launch with a live warhead. Additional complexities, though. I've been talking largely about ballistic missiles, except when we get into some of the tactical anti-missile systems. Hypersonic cruise missiles. Well, they're hypersonic missiles that come in low. They're not completely below the radar, but they're a way to get around some of the sensor systems that have been developed over the years to detect enemy missile launches. But they're also something that, if you've got hypersonic, what you do have with anti-missile missiles, of course, hitting a bullet with a bullet, there are ways to intercept those. The thing, and it's, again, if you've got them and you deployed them, you're adding a layer of doubt, deterring doubt to a potential aggressor. If there's anything I'd like to see more effort put into, even though I know what's going on, obviously it's very, very highly classified, but more effort put on into developing beam weapons to deal with intermediate range ballistic missiles, and not necessarily ones that you would have on board a large naval ship. It sounds good to me because you can move the ship around, but one that would have the same kind of efficacy or better as an Aegis ashore, but it's not going to have some of the problems that the Japanese civilians objected to with the discarded booster components of the Aegis system. Is it a futuristic weapon system? Yes, but we've also made a heck of a lot of advances in beam weapons, and also in providing power sources for beam weapons. You can get off a lot more shots with a beam weapon. So, welcome to Star Trek.
So, Jim, the question is, if, and Austin's answered this to some degree, is if Putin goes through with his threats and launches some sort of attack at NATO, will we be able to stop it, or will NATO be able to stop it?
Well, first of all, his threats of using nukes in Ukraine, he had those phony elections, which had the occupied parts of Ukraine voluntarily voting to join the Russia, and so now he says, well, now they're part of Russia. If you keep attacking there, we will use nuclear weapons to defend Mother Russia. Now they're tactical. They're not really, how should I put it? They're short-range missiles. They don't come in very fast. And, of course, we have no defenses there. Now, he's got ICBMs, which he could launch at NATO countries and NATO countries in general. But, I doubt it. He's going to do that because from what I'm getting out of Ukraine is that he's got a growing amount of opposition in the among the Russian people, and especially among the upper echelons, as it were. Even a lot of his aides, they realize that this is a no-win proposition. Nuclear warfare would be curtains for Russia. They still have about 1,000 tactical nuclear rockets, and some of those are carried by aircraft, but they have very few aircraft that can actually get through. And that's a Pandora's box, so to speak, because what's NATO going to do? They can't afford to just back off, because that basically says to Iran, and especially to North Korea, which has some crude nukes right now. In fact, North Korea recently, in the last few weeks, they declared they have a new first use policy. They will use it first if they feel they are threatened, because they know that if there's any indication they're going to use it, South Korea and United States and Japan all have defenses. So now they're saying, well, in effect, they're saying, you're not really protected with that nonsense, because we can attack, we can have a surprise attack if we feel we're threatened. Now, whether or not they'd actually try that is hard to say. But any of these countries, using nuke, including Russia, they risk devastating retaliation. Now, another problem Russia has, they've crippled their economy further with this mass mobilization. Because what it's done, and this doesn't get too much attention in the media, is they have crippled the Russian economy even further, because they have so many highly educated, skilled people who were not subject to the draft. We're not going to go in. That's why most of the people Russia Putin was basically dragging into the army were in the rural areas. He basically did not do it in the urban areas. Well, now the new one is, and he's losing maybe 500,000. Not just from people who who are refusing to go, but a lot of people are trying to get out of the country. Now, he basically made it illegal to leave Russia because of the emergency, as it were. But people are finding their way around that. I mean, it's just more difficult to get out. The Finland and the any nation with a border with with Russia that's somewhat friendly to the United States is finding a lot more Russians are showing up, military age Russians, and wanting to emergency visa, asylum, whatever. This is basically more of a hit to the Russian economy than the economic sanctions because there's nobody to do the work. And of course, there's already accounts from Ukraine about these Russian soldiers being sent in with no training. They're giving them uniforms and guns, and boom, off they go. There was one video, I think, of a woman doctor advising them. He says, "Look, we can't afford to give you medical supplies, but get your wives, your girlfriends to give you tampons. They work very well," which they did. That's how tampons were invented in World War I. Nurses noticed that these things, hey, we could use these instead of the old-fashioned way of dealing with the monthly problem. And so it comes full circle. But that's very demoralizing for Russians because they're getting this news too, even though it's more difficult to get the news in. There are Telegraph. That's an encrypted internet app, which Russia has not tried to block because they use it themselves. It's a way they can get the word out to the people in Russia who use it. Basically, it's initially it was rah-rah, propaganda for the Russian effort, but now it's basically people criticizing Putin because they say this is madness. And they give the numbers and they the accounts of the Russian soldiers being sent in, with no training, being just put at the front. And what the Ukrainians did, this is look, they got the word out, again, through Telegram, any other means they have. He says, look, if you're a Russian soldier in a hopeless situation, just surrender. We'll take care of you. We obey the Hague Convention. The Red Cross will interview you. Your family will be notified. If the Russians don't allow that, the Ukrainian general staff has long maintained a online database of the prisoners they have or dead Russians they found, often with pictures, just to report if they're alive or they're dead, what their status is. And Russians found out they could depend on that more than they could on their own government. So Putin is losing a lot of support, as it were, in his own country. And this economic damage from the general mobilization is really hurting him bad. Now, nobody wants to attack the Tsar because you have to kill him. You can't just wound him, and that's an axiom the Russians have learned over centuries. So the big debate in Russia, not publicly but privately, is how do we stop this madman before he gets us all killed or a lot of us killed. But the Ukrainians are basically making it even more painful for for Putin. But basically, he's all right. You want to send these untrained guys in? We'll take them. We'll put them in POW camps, which they may have to hide because Russians have been known to use the few ballistic missiles like the Iskander they still have left to attack POW encampments. But anyway, if these guys feel safer as a prisoner with the Ukrainians than in the Russian army as cannon fodder, I mean literally cannon fodder, that hurts Putin. Whichever way it goes. So if the missiles aren't the problem, Russia's the problem. North Korea, all right, we're going to attack first. That might, that's not going to solve their problems. I think they did that more out of bravado than anything else because they haven't got anything. Their economy's coming apart at the seams, more and more. But that's another story. But the big story is Russia. And, if Russia wants to recover economically or, in any way, they're going to have to stop the war. And they're basically going to have to give up, the occupied territories in Ukraine. And even with all these threats and all these weapons and whatnot, the Ukrainians are still gaining territory. I mean, they're very systematic. They're very deliberate. and their casualties are much less than Russian. Maybe on a figure, 6-1. Russians lose 6 soldiers for every 1 Ukrainian loses, and this definitely helps morale. But it also means the Ukrainians have better trained troops, more experienced, because they haven't been killed off since they get in there. And, so that's the problem with missile defense. You have to have a country that's willing to use it and take the blowback, the nuclear blowback. And that's a game the Russians are losing. And I don't think North Korea or Iran. Now, Iran has other problems now. They have the hijab revolution. And they definitely the people want to overthrow the religious dictatorship there. It's ironic because the first widespread demonstrations the religious government in Iran had was in 1979 when they tried to impose the hijab. All women had to cover their heads and not show any hair. And you had thousands of women coming out and protesting against that. Well, they killed some of them, but this time they're killing more of them, and they keep coming. So even the IRGC, the Schutzstaffel of the Iranian government, they're a little reluctant because if the government falls because of their bloodshed, well, who's on the target list for retaliation? So the terror cuts both ways.
Austin, you have anything to say before we wrap things up?
Yeah. Jim says North Korea's bravado. I think that's the same spur to action by Putin. It makes him sound macho, bravado, and it gives him a way of at least trying to politically divide NATO, because the European countries would be the ones who was taking a nuke, not the United States. But it gets attention, and it brings attention to a weapon system that Russia has and Ukraine doesn't. Take 2 steps back then, and you say, well, why doesn't Ukraine have them? Because Ukraine in 94, with the Budapest Accord, gave up its nuclear weapons. Okay, but I think they signed it in 94, Jim.
Yeah, there were 2 agreements, 93 and 96. Yeah.
Yeah, but the deal is that they gave them up for absolute Ukraine's territorial integrity, and that's look, can't trust dictatorships. Can't trust them. There's an old lesson in our face with a new war. I do not think Putin is going to use a nuke for a bunch of reasons, and Jim just gave you really, if you go through it, 8 or 9 great ones why he won't do it. But nevertheless, to get in the subject of today's podcast, we need to make a sustained effort to improve missile defenses just for the sake of human civilization. I'll put it that way.
Okay, we'll wrap it up with that, and we'll talk to you gentlemen next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys.